Good afternoon. Welcome to the Carter Center's Forum on Human Rights. My name's Josh Griffin. I'm a graduate assistant with the Human Rights Program. Quick housekeeping item. Forum members can participate in the live chat and ask questions to the panelists by joining the Forum on Human Rights. Complete the field on the Roundtables page to apply for membership. Today's conversation will illustrate the role of art in amplifying social justice activism and will serve to encourage fellow citizens to seek creative, nonviolent ways to bring attention to ongoing racial injustice. To illustrate and speak to the role of the artists, we have three Seattle-based poets with us today. Ebo Barton is a Black and Filipino, transgender, non-binary, queer artist and educator. A leader in the art and activism, Ebo is committed to creating opportunities for others to organize, heal, and rejoice. Through open mics to curated shows like Alchemy Poetry, to educating across the country at various institutions. Chelsea Richardson is a mother, teacher, and poet. In 2019 to 2020, she was awarded the role of Master Poet by the Center for Washington Culture and Traditions. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Creative Writing from the University of Washington, go Dogs, and a master's degree in teaching English education. Chelsea currently works as an educator at Nova Alternative High School in Seattle, Washington. And lastly, we have Ben Yisrael, who holds a PhD in political science. He is a poet, storyteller, and world explorer. He is a 2017 and 2019 Seattle Poetry Slam Grand Champion. He and Ebo co-founded the Alchemy Poetry Series in Seattle. He's a coordinator at he's a coordinator at Healthy King County Coalition and policy fellow at the Center for Justice Research located at Texas Southern University. Ben is currently practicing social justice activism and will speak with us as soon as he can. And with that, sorry about that. Also want to add that each artist has posted their Instagram @ next to their names. Please feel free to follow them so you can stay up to date on all of their projects. Leading up to today's conversation, I asked each of our artists to address social justice through their spoken words. Now we'll listen to each artist's poetic truth and then move into a Q&A. Chelsea, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. I'm going to share a piece from my book called All Water Has Perfect Memory. It's my debut poetry book. Each poem has a quote in the beginning, and here's the quote that I chose for this piece. When the last tree is cut, the last fish is caught, and the last river is polluted, when to breathe air is sickening, you will realize too late that wealth is not in bank accounts and that you can't eat money. And the poem is titled, Setting Suns as Bright as Wildfire. Scientists say we are at least 60% water. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams. It is no wonder we are melting glaciers and setting suns as bright as wildfires. Across the Amazon and California and California and California, we are flooded with centuries of unfinished business. And if our ancestors are still dreaming, I believe they would not hesitate to invite us into their nightmares too. A fragile and wanting nightmare, like cracked teeth begging for a smile, like sheets of ice retreating in Antarctica and Greenland, screams escaping to the back of the throat like the ocean absorbing the earth's fever for the body to catch and hold. The Mississippi Basin's love affair with its dying climate, and wide like the volatile waves who swallowed your great mothers and fathers whole. The pale green reef that dressed their bodies and wrapped round necklines. But don't you remember the way the water does, the perfect memory eroding time, precious arms and elbows flailing like arms in hurricanes, chains in endless blue night sky rippling underwater, tender twinkling stars drifting into their open eyes, maybe Saturn or Jupiter waving across their drowning chests. How the moon wanted so bad to taste their black skin that it shoved itself to the bottom of the sea so that it could sit with them. Doesn't this water taste different now? Thick as blood, choking on bullets, like Tamir's 12-year-old lungs filling up to the brim of this earth's mouth, her kiss of death along shorelines. It is no wonder we are up to our necklines in debt. See, this water is unforgiving. It doesn't matter how much we refuse to reckon with our past, who loves it, or how much it is unloved. If it isn't nurtured, it will become fresh with poison. Did you think a pure White House and fresh reef-colored paper would keep you from flooding? We are all just a few degrees separate from someone's master, someone's slave, someone still waiting in this water curtsying to ward off demons, while this water is still rising, still a fraction of a human, still remembering. Thank you.
Thank you for that piece. That was beautiful. Snaps, 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 snaps. Y'all feel free to snap out there too, right? If you really are feeling that poem, feel free to snap. Ben, could you please, provide us with one of your pieces?
Hey, what's up?
What's up? Are you able to?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had it muted. Yeah, I can recite a poem. Sorry. Ebo, what do you think I should do? I'm gonna put this on Ebo.
I like your poem about the Tuskegee experiment.
I would love it if you did one of my poems, Ben.
Oh, all right. That poem is called Trigger.
You could also just do one of mine, if you'd like.
True. I could promote your book. All right. This is Trigger Warning. If you believe the election of Barack Obama ended systemic racism, ushered in post-racial equality, think the real issue is class, or advertise how many people of color you have slept with as evidence that you're progressive, please consider this your re-education. Even when we are not being bludgeoned with billy clubs and bombs, they are playing Mockingbird and launching questions like weapons. You know your people could achieve more without rioting. Of course your lives matter, but could you protest peacefully, suffer quietly? April 4th, 1968, America massacres the Peace Prize winner in Memphis because prophets of peace are dangerous to the profit line of capitalism. They ask, why don't you just build your own community instead of seeking handouts, kickstart your own economy? Remind them of how they built bonfires from our bones. May 31st, 1921, Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma was bombed to ash. Fact, 9/11 was not the first time airplanes were used to terrorize U.S. citizens. Fact, white supremacy was our Al-Qaeda, destroying 191 businesses, 1,265 homes, and over 300 lives. They will say, if you have so many problems with this country, why don't you just go back to Africa? As if their ancestors didn't bring us here by force, as if the Honorable Marcus Garvey didn't build a movement to establish trade with the mother continent, only to be sabotaged by Judeo-Christian supremacy and the U.S. government, because ultimately our enemy prefers us in captivity and doesn't want us to leave, and they don't care when we tell them that we can't breathe. So the murders of Eric, Oscar, Laquan, Trayvon, Betty, Tamir, Rakia, and Sandra may or may not be indicted, because only a thin veil separates the robes of Supreme Court and the knights of the Ku Klux Klan, because the original police in this country were slave catchers. So maybe they are just doing their jobs, because every time they patrol our streets, it feels like the ghost of Jim Crow is riding shotgun. Some say, we don't know what happened before those videos. We know damn well what happened. Tuskegee experiments, transatlantic slave trade, force-fed religion, institutionalized rape and lynching, Rosewood, black coats, crack cocaine, and COINTELPRO, the FBI program to destroy all black nationalist movements and prevent the rise of Messiah. So don't tell us how far we've come. Don't demand that we settle for anything less than salvation. Don't ask us to lose gracefully, like Martin Luther King. Flint, Michigan, current day. When they cannot kill you with the lead from their bullets, they will put it in the water.
I think one thing about these poems thus far is they very much speak for themselves and speak to the truth and the lineage of ongoing oppression that large proportions of U.S. citizens and marginalized citizens across the world face. So I hope y'all are very much attuned and aware of that. And Ebo, could you provide us with a piece, please?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me here, y'all. My name is Ebo Barton. I use they, them, or he, him pronouns. And I invite you to use whichever pronouns feel most difficult for you to use when you're looking at me. And if you've never used they, them pronouns before, it sounds something like this. Ebo came to do the most amazing poetry I've ever seen. They were very attractive. I really wanted to give them $20. Anyway, so that's just how you use that. And I'm going to read y'all a poem, and it's inspired by Beyonce, because who's not inspired by Beyonce, really? So it's called Freedom Cut Me Loose. And so thanks for receiving it. When I came out to my mother, her first reaction was to comment on the volume of my voice when I said transgender, as if being myself in public wasn't already loud. I lowered my voice. Do you reach adulthood when your parents' reactions to your unblossoming start to sound hollow like an empty cage? When you look into a mirror and discover you are the only and ugliest salvation your family ever inherited? Do you reach full-grown adulthood when your reflection rejects you in your second language? The language you kept safe in your back pocket is an exhausted compass that only points towards the ocean. What about respect for my elders means mute myself? Are you still an adult if you just want to go home? I learned that being free isn't what everyone wants, especially if you find custody convenient. And I know that you think my gender makes you angry, that your Jesus did not die for this, but the truth is, my gender binds you to fear, uncovers your discomfort from seeing the rapture of my reach, these bare wrists. What about my freedom scares you? I named myself Ebo to worship the slave rebellion that drowned their captors, rose into the sky, turned into birds, and flew back home. Why would you deny me this worship? Why would you keep this story trapped in a book? But don't mistake me for fearless. It's taken me a whole lifetime to get back home, but I'm still willing to come back for you if you want to come. Jaden Smith's skirt, Billy Porter's entire wardrobe, Lizzo's exposed thong, Monroe Bergdorf's middle finger, Zaya Wade, Harriet Tubman, my beard, my pronouns, my lips blossoming on a shoulder blade. We are the efflorescence of eternal emancipation. Come with us. Before I leave, tell my mother I've uninstalled the whisper in my authentic. If you don't want to untie the knots of shame, trying to convince you compromises the wind, cradling my wings, so stay in bliss. But ask yourself, are you free? Or are you conditioned to this captivity? Whatever the answer is, please let me live. I just want to go home. Thank you all so much. My name is Ebo Barton. I appreciate it. I'm really excited to talk to y'all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Just all these poems are just so beautiful and just say so much. I really hope our audience can connect to this and got a pen and pad and just taking some notes to be able to later on do some self-reflections. So now we're going to go ahead and move into the Q&A. And feel free to, as you answer my questions, to explain to our audience, what inspired your pieces. So my first question for y'all is, 66 years ago, in the summer of 1955, a 14-year-old named Emmett Till traveled to visit his cousins in Mississippi. He later returned to Chicago in a casket, having been murdered by the Ku Klux Klan for whistling at a white lady. Emmett Till's mother insisted on having an open casket, saying, "I wanted the world to see what they did to my child." In 2021, we see the lynchings and the murders of people who share the same melanin as Emmett Till. What needs to occur over the next 66 years for society to end its terrorization of Asian, Black, Indigenous, and people of color bodies? Chelsea, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
I was just getting ready to ask who is going to answer this question first. And so it's landing on me, huh? I think that there needs to be radical change in the sense, in many aspects, but one would probably be a swift redistribution of wealth. And I think that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but in some ways we are living in every way. We are living in a society that honors and respects people based on their income level. And if there's some way that we can change the way that people are allowed to live peaceful, happy lives, and in the situation, for example, in Atlanta, that you spoke to, where women who are obviously working in massage parlors because they need money, I think that that's a huge issue, that if they didn't have to struggle and find ways to make ends meet, that maybe they wouldn't be in a position where someone had access to them in that way and could murder them. And so I think that's where I would start, but there are many things, and I'm going to pass the question off to either Ebo or Ben to elaborate. Thank you.
You know, I'll build on what Chelsea said. I definitely think, economic disparities play a role, but we have to remember that we were not poor before we were put in captivity, right? You weren't enslaving poor people. You were enslaving scientists and royalty and medicine people and engineers. And so fundamentally, there is a system. We can't forget the American system is built on racism. It is built on racism. It's built on the genocide of millions of indigenous people and the enslavement of millions of people. The United States is the only country in modern history, or that we ever know of in history, to use a nuclear weapon on another country. What happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, I mean, you would have to change America completely. The system that exists can no longer exist. How that comes about, that's up for debate. But, we have institutions codified into place that are completely built off of wickedness. The police in the United States were originally slave catchers, right? So when you have a system that's built off of inequity, how can it ever be equal unless you go to another system? We can't reform a system that is sexist or that's based off of rape culture or based off of slavery. You can't reform that. You have to have a different system. So that's my thought.
Thanks for that, Ben. I think that an oversimplified version of what my response to this would be having a little bit of humility, and also getting out of your own way are the two very basic ways in which you start this work, right? I just need you to get out of your own way and know that you don't know everything, and that maybe you can be taught something, and what you were conditioned to believe might not always be true, especially for somebody of a different experience than you. And I feel like that's the first thing that we need to step into before even engaging in conversation. And so that piece is often missing, of humility and getting out of your own way to get to a place of understanding and dare I say, compassion.
Yeah, no, those are all, really good responses. Yeah, the wealth gap out here, definitely leads to divides and the lack of resources, the lack of economic resources and social sector resources drastically disadvantages communities of marginalization across the board. So yeah, definitely needs massive reforms there. So, speaking about economics, I have a question that speaks to that. Um, Political activist Angela Davis said, "The idea of freedom is inspiring, but what does it mean? If you are free in a political sense, but have no food, what's that? The freedom to starve? So what's the value of political freedom if we don't have economic freedom?" I open it to any of y'all to take the question.
Well, I think that much like the word diversity, it really just depends on who's saying the word freedom and what they mean, what experience do they have with it, right? And so in the poem that I just read, I talk about freedom and how it really actually depends on where your frame of mind is too, right? And so yeah, so to answer your question, I feel like one sort of plays into the other if we're talking about freedom in a broad sense. So if it's just a generic form of freedom, but there are so many other ways, like are you free from societal norms? Are you free from Eurocentric beauty standards? Are you free from capitalism, which is really hard to do in our society, right? So I think that it really just depends on who's saying it, how they're saying it, and what their lived experience is.
Ben, it looked like you were about to answer, but can you ask the question one more time? I do have it here, but it'd be good to hear it.
Yeah, no, I got you. So the question's political activist Angela Davis said, "The idea of freedom is inspiring, but what does it mean? If you are free in a political sense but have no food, what's that? The freedom to starve? So what is the value of political freedom if you don't have economic freedom?"
I don't think there's a difference. There's no such thing as political freedom without economic freedom, or vice versa, right? When we look at what happened in Tulsa, right? You had a very in 1921, you had a thriving Black community with several Black millionaires and entrepreneurs, and while they were wealthy, right? Um, their wealth never protected them from the mobs that came and killed them. And in fact, 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma, was the first time that airplane bombing, a city was bombed in the United States. And it was by, white citizens as well as, some of their law enforcement people. So, we talk about getting educations and getting money, but as we have seen, there may be some places that you get to go when you have money or degrees, but ultimately, when we look at Martin Luther King, right, and Malcolm X, and all these great figures, their prestige didn't prevent them from their deaths. When you have Michelle Obama being a Black woman who was the first lady who, had not, more death threats than any first lady in history, and even more death threats than Barack Obama, her husband, who was the president. So that just proves that, you can't separate the two. And again, going back to what I said earlier, right, you can't legislate hate out. Obviously, we want to be able to punish people when they commit hate crimes, but ultimately there's something fundamentally spiritually wrong with a certain group of people here in the United States that don't see other people as human. And when you don't see someone as human because of a difference in lifestyle or sexual orientation or race or religion, right? Something's fundamentally wrong with that person or that group of people. And we have to make sure, obviously, that we have laws on laws on the books to protect. But we also have to stop looking at it as just laws and fundamentally look at what is happening in our society, what's happening in our religious institutions, what's happening in our schools, what's happening in our clubs, what's happening in our fraternities and sororities, what is happening that is making people believe that this is an appropriate way to live.
Yeah, so these are tough questions, and I don't really know that I have a clear and concise answer, other than I believe that, as we said earlier, our economic structure and our political structure, and as Ben mentioned earlier, that our structures are not designed for all of us to flourish. So what Angela Davis was really talking about was freedom to be a free, autonomous human being with, I mean, and especially during the time that she said this, she was talking about not being beaten down in the street, right? And so we're still struggling with the same exact issues. We're still struggling with issues of people's water supplies being stolen by Nestle, with our U.S. government actually participating and continuing to protect large corporations and put the standard of protection and freedom above people and given to the hands of corporations. And so when we're talking about the difference between economic and political freedom, they're intertwined, and they are, at least in the way that they function in this society, they're inseparable. And so I don't know how to answer that question other than to say we're they're connected and they're intertwined, and I'm not sure how to change that. So there's my answer.
No, that was a great answer. All these, answers are great. I think it just speaks to just the complexity of the ongoing issues, the systemic issues that have been about since, the formation of this nation. And like Ben was speaking to, that, America is built on the backs of others, and we have yet to truly recognize that and honor that, and, pay reparations, in my opinion, and have those tough conversations through truth telling and truth and reconciliation commissions. Definitely could assist us in, moving the paradigm and getting us that much closer to ideals that we currently don't live in this country. So I digress. A little more, not as tense question, but can you, tell our audience how you use your art to influence social change, and the types of impacts your art has had in your community and or communities? Open to any of y'all like to take it.
Well, I can just say that I teach and work with youth in the Seattle School District. I work with a high population of homeless students, students who are a part of the criminal punishment system, students who are a part of many marginalized communities. And what I see with my role as an educator and a poet is to make sure that I am always being honest, that I am always telling the truth, that I am open with students about them telling their truth and being honest with their art and their work, and that I don't have all the answers, and that I'm their student as well, and that I'm constantly learning with them. And so there may be things that I think I know about certain communities, and sometimes they have to school me. But I see that with my art, that my job, in the same way that I teach, and I kind of try and I know I'm not her, but I try to follow mentors who or people that they didn't assign themselves as my mentor, but I am taking them on by reading their works and studying who they are. I think of people like Toni Morrison, who, when you read one of her books, you realize that you actually are not in it for pure enjoyment. You're in it to learn and to read, and you actually have to do research and try and understand what it is that she's talking about. And so I look at my art and my poetry as a way to teach and open up space. Like, for example, the piece that I read is really about climate change and about our country and us having to reckon with our past, and that the transatlantic slave trade actually had a huge effect on our climate today. And if you go and you do the research and you understand what happened at the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, you'll see that we actually, that is partly where climate change, or where we started to destroy the environment. And I want people to I don't know that people will just read that poem and jump into it, but maybe they'll read it and they'll start to try and understand. So I like to see myself as a poet who is also an educator.
Ebo or Ben, would y'all like to answer that?
So, and just to give some context, because I've been coming in and out of the show, so people are like, what's wrong with this dude? I'm actually right now in Austin, Texas, to testify on the George Floyd Act, which would be a major act to, force police to intervene, one, if they see another officer committing excessive force. It would also remove qualified immunity. And it would also just create more oversight at the state level when it comes to some of the tragedies that are going on. So I'm a poet. I'm also a policy guy. I'm also a PhD. I believe that there are multiple ways of educating. I don't believe that one is higher than the other. And I believe whatever way you can get in, get in. So, everybody's not going to be interested in hearing about laws or bills or testimony, right? And so poetry is one way that I can, at least tell the story that I know, right? It's not a full story, but it's a part of the human story. And I believe poetry is a way of bringing people together, and also a way of helping people imagine a different world, a better world. And that's why I'm a poet. That's why I do what I do. And also, I get to hang out with Chelsea and Ebo.
We paid him to say that, just so everybody knows. But anyway, so the reason why I do the work that I do is that I've been writing poetry for most of my adult life. And, in a youth group that I was mentoring, they named me the Jim Halpert. I don't know if you all know this reference, but they named me the Jim Halpert of spoken word poetry. And the reason why I say that is because everything that I have and everything that I am is because of spoken word poetry. So I never would have been able to be an advocate and manager in nonprofit world. I would never be able to perform at countries across the country and educate young people and meet all of the different people that I've met and have the network that I have if it wasn't for wanting to do this work. And I come from a place in which, I come from a school system in which I came out of a high school of 3,000 young people. And we were all on tracks, and there was a number put to you in which you were not expected to do much. And we knew that, like, there was this known culture in our school that there were some of us that weren't going to make it. Right. And so, I went off to the military. I went off to vocational school. I've done everything. And this is the only thing that has kept me and has gotten me to do bigger work than I ever thought was possible. So the reason why I do this is to save my own life, and I'm desperate to normalize my identities in the world. And this has given me access to be able to do this. So yeah.
Thank you. So I have a few questions from the audience. One person asks, this is for all y'all, what do schools need to do to better get youth into the arts and involved with social justice?
Fund it. Fund the arts. That's one. And also two, I think that teachers, I know that Chelsea does, but just bringing arts into the classroom when it's not necessarily about art, because I promise you that there is something about that. And you can always have a conversation about art and how it's expressed, how feelings are expressed, or how the societal norm can be displayed or distributed to many different audiences in this way, right? So I think that teachers can incorporate art when there isn't funding for into conversations that are maybe about history, or about, I don't know, there's plenty of weird art about math. I'm not a math person, but I've seen it, you know? So anyway, I'm sure there's also poems about it.
You know, it's a hard question for me to answer, and the reason why I say that is because school in the United States, typically there's three types of school. There's homeschooling, there's private school, and there's public school, and I participated in all three coming up. And so private school is usually limited to people with a certain amount of economic means, and most of our people don't have the ability to actually do that. So that kind of eliminates a lot of people who come from marginalized groups, African American, Latinx, First Nations people. Not saying that it's not available, but often we don't have the access to that other people have. So when you eliminate that, two, when you look at homeschooling, that usually means that one or both of the parents has the ability to stay home, has the economic means to not be working and fully dedicate their time to the education of their children, which rarely happens in our communities. And then third is public school, which is controlled by the majority, right? And so when we are in a country with majority rule, and the majority has consistently promoted a status quo that, again, puts sexism and racism and classism and capitalism and xenophobia in stone, they may think it's not in their best interest to teach activism if they're trying to keep things the way that it is. What people fail to understand, though, is that, as Malcolm said, if you try to hurt the root of a tree, you're hurting the whole tree. And when you look at what we have contributed to the United States and the world, it's astounding. We often hear about the contributions that so-called African Americans have made in music and entertainment, and food and dance and all these real reasons, inspirations to live, right? But when we talk about the scientific contributions and technology that were created by people of color, we literally would not be living in a modern age if it weren't for us. So, as I always say, if you continue to oppress, if you want to take us off the planet or subjugate us, you're really hurting yourself, because the innovations that have made the world great today have come from African American, indigenous people. So yeah, they should be doing it, but so many people are set on keeping the status quo and not necessarily doing what's best for the planet, but doing what is best for them to stay in power and not thinking long term.
Wow. I think this is actually, this question has many, many, many levels and folds. One thing that I would say that Ebo already spoke to was to fund schools, fund them fully and fund them properly. That would be the very first thing that schools need to do better, to actually include arts and social justice. I think that it's kind of ridiculous to think that there aren't ways to include social justice in every single subject. Um, for example, anytime you talk about math, you could be including different aspects of the world and different uh, movements or different ideas that are popping up, that are coming up, that people need to be discussing in the classroom. And so I think that education in and of itself should be a true reflection of the world and what is happening. And if we're not teaching our young people about what's actually happening in the world, we're doing them a disservice. And so that's what I would add, is fund and continue to actually teach what's really happening in the world, and not shield and protect and shelter our children so much that they don't understand what happens outside of them and their bubble or their biome within their school community.
Yeah, those are all really good responses. Yeah, it's just, how do we get that funding? It's like there's that need, and we know that we need this in these school systems. But at least within Seattle, if y'all could speak to this too, it just seems that Seattle is kind of just in a different place and has different values. So could you just speak to, what is it like doing your social justice activism and work in the environment that is Seattle, that is Amazon, that is just gentrification, that is, there's no more, 23rd and Union is gentrified. The, Red Apple's gone now on 23rd and Jefferson. Like, what is it? How is it how are y'all able to do your work in the ever-changing environment that is Seattle?
To be honest with you, because the main focus is students, you just have to keep focusing on your students and taking care of them. I never thought I would see a day when I would be teaching Zoom school at home, and that I would be teaching students who are in transition and they're living in a tent city and being taught by me in my home while they're in a tent. And so all you really can do is just keep focusing on the student and how to care for them and how to be compassionate and encourage them. That's the best you can do. And just to continue to be honest, we live in a huge metropolitan city. We are surely being smothered by Amazon and other large companies who continue to take up space and underpay people and refuse, and are actually refusing right now and finding ways to keep their employees from unionizing. And so you talk about those things, and you talk about what's actually happening. You talk about how to pay rent to the Duwamish. You talk about how to get involved in different communities. And that's all you can do.
Ebo or Ben, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Seattle, the thing that I think that is interesting for me as a person of color in the state is that when I go out and do poems at particular venues in Seattle, I always have to remember that as a Black and Filipino person, it is a 7% white city, or excuse me, 7% Black city, and a 14% Asian city, and a 65.7% white city. And I am absolutely the sore thumb in most events that I go to. And I always have to remember that for my safety, for what I end up saying out loud and decide what I'm going to say out loud for my own safety, and for what I'm going to get back in return. So oftentimes I'll get a lot of like, you're so, we'll fall into the, you're so brave and you're so strong. And it's like, but at what point do I have any other choice? Right. And so oftentimes in Seattle, it feels like I am being tokenized, or that I am I'm trying to, like as a, like I talk about my identities a lot, but like as a transgender, non-binary, Black and Filipino poet and artist, blah, blah, low income, blah, blah, blah. Like I hit off all the check marks. Am I there to hit off all of your check marks, or am I there because you think I have something valuable to say? And that's a barrier that I have to remember every time I do something in this city. And then I think the other part is with Seattle is because we're marketed, we're marketed as the most progressive city in North America, or in the United States or whatever. Then it becomes that poetry is the most highly sought after, least valued artistic form in this very wealthy city. Because they want our words and they don't understand what it takes for us to get there. So it looks really great for all their events or whatever to throw up this poem. And then in the end, they give you a gift card or a thank you or whatever. And then it feels like I'm devalued in that way, because all of this all of this attention onto my art. And then really it was just to get your message out, and I had nothing to do with it. Right. And so this is something that's common that happens in Seattle, and there's no accountability to it. It's just something that is the norm.
Ben, what are your thoughts? I think you're muted.
I can, what Evo just said really resonates with me about the whole tokenized thing. I go to other parts of the country and people are like, oh my God, you guys are so progressive there. And the reality is our progressive ass city was gassing and beating people last summer who were protesting police murder and injustice. Okay. With the most liberal city council in the history of the United States, with all Democrats in there, right? Pretty much, not all, but most, and a Democratic, mayor who is also a woman, who's also a member of the LGBTQ community. The reality is, it does not matter how liberal white people are. It never results in any type of justice for us. And as bad and horrible as, our past president was, Donald Trump, with his overt racism, and it was horrible, we still have to contend to the fact that we had to choose between this openly wicked man and another person who wrote the crime bill that put more Black people and brown people in prison than Bush and Reagan combined, and he's a Democrat. So, being in Seattle, interestingly enough, when I first moved to Seattle 6 years ago, I was part of the poetry community. There's 2 poetry slams at the time, and I won't say anyone's name, but, I start going to one poetry event, and not to put anyone on blast, but Ebo had basically called for some community accountability. I didn't know Ebo at the time, and I didn't know really anyone, but a lot of white poets wanted me to attend this meeting so I could come in and basically be the proof that they weren't, racist, because Ebo was calling them to task. And, behind closed doors, I was hearing white poets in the art community saying that Nikita Oliver and Ebo Barton, they're racist and blah, 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 blah. But publicly, these people were all about going to Black Lives Matters protests and stuff. So, Seattle is very good at acting. And that's about it. Because if it doesn't result in any actual difference in how we're treated, it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter if they say they're for Black people or brown people. It doesn't really matter when the results aren't any different. You can be a liberal police officer and shoot a Black person, or you can be a conservative one and shoot Black people. You can be a liberal mayor and gas Black and brown people, and you can be a conservative and do the same thing. So how is that helping us? It doesn't really matter, honestly.
I want to get to one last question before we start to wrap this up. It comes from our audience. They ask, what art pieces, either current and or from the past, speak to you and are great examples of art creating positive change in the United States or the world?
I'm gonna talk first. I think it's been a while since I was first, so I'll be fair. I think that Ebony Stewart, who's a poet out of Texas, shout out to Houston, and her poem, it's called Mental Health Bars. And the way in which that particularly, for me, brings up social change is that it might be a surprise to some folks, but mental health is not often discussed in a thorough way in a lot of the communities that I'm part of. And the ways in which she is vulnerable and admits to struggling with her mental health is social change for me as a Black person. And to be honest, in a Filipino household as well, like just being able to admit was empowering to me, and then being able to hear the narrative about it and being able to relate to that. So sparking social change in the sense of like not feeling ashamed anymore.
Yeah, Ibo, thank you for bringing that up, because that reminds me that one of the things that I did want to speak about today was the Griot Party, which is a community that I'm affiliated with here in Seattle. It's a group of Black storytellers, Black poets who are coined and given the title Griot after the African name for griot, which is also known as the Jali. And the point of that whole entire community is to create social change in the Black community. It is to tell stories from the perspective of Black people and discuss our mental health, discuss the ways in which we feel, heal, and grow. And to me, that would be, I think, the most current, modern kind of art that I'm seeing that I feel good about in terms of healing. But also, I don't know if people are really, I swear I'm being honest, but I don't know if people are really aware of the kind of art that Ben and Ibo do together. And there's the mention about them creating the space, which is called the Alchemy Poetry Series, where they offer space for poets to come and read and perform, and they invite people to share. And I honestly think that is also a very beautiful healing space, a space that does create positive change. And I think that even if we are talking about things that are difficult to talk about and things that are hard and things that maybe hurt to discuss, we are creating positive change. And I think that that's what they're doing with that space. So thank you.
I think Ben might have had to step away. Yeah, okay. So we got about 5 or so minutes left, and I want to let y'all, tell our audience how they can best support you in your art. So if you want to inform our audience how they could do that, that'd be great. So go ahead, and what they're pointing at, I believe, we're gonna play a little game of charades, is I think is their Instagram @ so if you want to go ahead and follow them on Instagram.
No, we were pointing at each other. I think. Is that what
Yeah, because we were seeing. Yeah, because we were seeing who was gonna talk.
Got you. Well,
okay.
that's why I don't play charades, so y'all can go ahead.
Now you do. Now you
So yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Ebo Barton. On Facebook, I'm Ebo Barton Poetry. You can also find me on my website at www.ebobarton.com, which is my name, surprisingly. But you can also buy my first book, first collection of poetry, Insubordinate, on my website. And for any teachers or book clubs out there, I do have discounts for 5 and 10 quantity packages. So please keep in touch with me, and thanks for having me, y'all.
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Ask a Brother. You can also buy me, Chelsea, and Ebo lunch at Yala on Olive Way in Seattle. It's really good. The falafel and the lamb, they're both good. That's the way you can support us. And buy Chelsea's book and Ebo's book.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Buy my book. You can find me at chelsearichardson.org. Also, keep asking us to speak and welcome us to forums like this, because I do believe that we as artists do deserve space in the political realm, that people should be asking artists what we believe and how we benefit the world and how we help us thrive as people. But yeah, so follow me at Self Love Vigilante. It's right there by my name on Instagram, and you can purchase my book, and that would be probably the best way to support my art.
So just want to reaffirm that you've heard how you can best support these artists. So please take the time to support them any way that you can.
I have one other thing, Josh. So
please.
Both Ebo and I are doing poetry courses on Awful Good Writers, and they're month-long courses. It costs $150 for an entire month, but it's definitely worth it. You will get hands-on just experience from a lot, not just us, but a lot of poets who have 10, 15, 20 years in the poetry game. We know how important words are to shaping our lives. So check us out on Awful Good Writers. Ebo has a workshop right now. Mine's coming up in April.
Yeah, so please go ahead and sign up for those workshops. I'm sure it'll be a great creative learning experience for you and be able to connect with them on a more one-on-one experience and level. So in closing, I want to thank our 3 artists for spending the afternoon with us, the early evening here in Atlanta, and just really speaking your truths with us, letting you know what your lived experiences are. I hope that was an educational experience to our audience. It definitely should be, in my opinion. And to our audience, thank you for also taking the time to be here. As I mentioned, to listen to our artists and their truths, to their activism, to their lived experiences, and to their words. I must remind you that being here is not enough, that this discussion will continue on the forum on human rights, but it's paramount that it continues in your own life. The last question I have goes to our audience. How are you going to advocate for social justice and protect, respect, and value Asian American lives, LGBTQ plus lives, Latinx lives, Indigenous lives, Black lives, people of color lives? Ask yourself, what are you going to do? And with that, that concludes today's conversation. Part 2 of this conversation will be April 22nd. Hope to see y'all there.
Thanks so much.